Great. So first, I want to thank everybody for being here, and I especially want to thank everybody for having me here. It's always great to come to Switzerland and give a talk. So keep a round of applause for putting on such an awesome con. It's really great. I'll tell you, putting on a con is not an easy task, and how well run this is amazing. We run DerbyCon and a few other ones, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. So I mean, seriously, kudos to everybody that made this happen. It's been really smooth, really awesome. The talks have been great, the speakers, I mean, everything. So again, shout out to everybody that made it possible here. Just a couple quick slides on myself. I've got to do some fun things, everything from being on the news to kind of owning everything that I like to touch. So that was in front of Congress. I got yelled at a whole bunch of times by the Democratic Party. They don't like me at all. I'm also a nerd. I'm a Doctor Who fan. I like hugging and cuddling, and that was in Paris and a few other places. I was a Marine. I like to blow stuff up. Lots of things, lots of guns. And I'm also one of the sexiest men alive, apparently. That is not photoshopped. That is 100% what was on TV. Now, the funny part about this is that when I was on TV, I was on in the United States, it's called the Katie Couric Show. And it's actually funny, maybe I can show it a little bit later if I got time. But I basically got done hacking into someone in the audience's computer, and I enabled her webcam, and I was looking at her daughter and stuff like that, and all this other stuff. And there was an actor coming up next, and I don't know if you know the show Sherlock. There's a guy named Cumberbatch that's like the actor. And so it said, up next, one of the world's sexiest men alive, but then they removed the up next. You can kind of see the fade of it right there, and then it just left that with my picture up there. So I'm keeping it. I like it. I like to think it's my title, sexy. And most importantly, I love hanging out with friends and meeting new people. So, it's always great to talk and hang out with folks here. And last night we had a great time in Switzerland. So it's always great to get to see friends and hang out and party because we don't get to do it a lot when we're always traveling a lot. So today, this talk, I look at education awareness programs in a lot of companies. And I think education awareness has been a really big focus for a number of organizations because it's really important. We see a lot of attacks happening through phishing or social engineering or whatever you want to call it. And, the techniques that we use in the industry aren't the same of what we see in the wild. And what's interesting is our education awareness programs are based off of how we test as pen testers or as researchers or whatever. And so for me personally, we have to shift the dynamics of how we do things in pen testing and social engineering and everything else to emulate what we see out there in the wild or what's going to be coming up later on. And, I've been doing a lot of this stuff. It was funny, when I first got into the security industry, I worked for the Marine Corps on the intelligence side. And I got out, and social engineering wasn't really a big thing. No one was really doing it as far as part of their pen tests, or companies weren't focusing on education awareness. There wasn't a huge thread around teaching users around security. And we've really changed a lot, which is a great thing. But we really have to focus on making it the right type of research, the right type of education, because without that, we're going to get owned for a long time. And there's no way to stop everything. There's no question about that. But we can definitely do things that at least detect certain things, much like we would do on the network side. And so today I'm going to be, showing you kind of what we do for education awareness, what we're taught for education awareness, what we do as pen testers, and then kind of blowing all of that out of the water. And I'm going to show you some cool techniques in the new version of the Social Engineer Toolkit. I actually just released version 6.02 yesterday. It was funny. Ubix was giving us talk on how to protect against Java apples. Did anybody see that one? Yeah, a few people. Great. So in the middle of his presentation, one of his defensive mechanisms was to remove the header or the user agent string. If you see a user agent string in Java, deny it. So I rewrote the Java applet, so now the user agent string now emulates Internet Explorer. So the Java applet now calls out via Internet Explorer, and now you got around it. So that's I released a new version 6.02 yesterday. During the talk, by the way, it was pretty cool. So fun times. So here's how we hack today. Now starting off, again, I'm going to walk through what we're taught. We're going to walk through what really works, and then we're just going to mess some stuff up. I'm going to kind of throw out a lot of misconceptions that we use. Like, for example, one of my favorite ones to do isn't necessarily exploitation. If you look at, I guess, the latest and greatest sexy exploit, and it's very difficult to fire off an exploit on an organization. Like, for example, if I'm going to compromise them with like an IE 0-day, I need to do a lot of research and homework beforehand to make sure I understand what version they have. Do they have things like Emmet installed, or what type of protection mechanisms do they have in place? And in most organizations, does everybody here have the same exact version of IE across your entire organization? No, right? So you're limited on your attack surface and what you're actually going to go after. And so for me personally, I don't ever really rely off of exploits anymore to compromise an organization. I use methods that are legitimate, that I know if they have certain things installed, I can take advantage of that without actually triggering something like a 0-day or an exploit. And to be honest with you, in the real world scenarios, the chances of you getting burned by a 0-day are very small. Most people don't want to burn a 0-day on you because of what you have. So we'll talk about different techniques that you can use to defeat a lot of the stuff that's out there today. We're gonna get around things like application whitelisting. We're gonna get around next generation firewalls. We're gonna get around obviously antivirus, but that's kind of a joke in itself, right? We'll get around anything that you can possibly imagine. We'll get around Emmet. We'll get around everything in this talk, which would be cool. And additionally, my favorite one that we're taught, which is the hover, right? So we're all taught that if you get an email or you get a website or whatever, hover over the link to make sure that it's legit. If you hover over the link, it's good, right? Well, we're going to defeat the hover today too. So we're going to get around the hovering and actually compromise people with a legitimate link that looks legitimate, but it's really going to a bad site. So if you look at today's phishing, we send hundreds of emails or whatever. Sometimes it's got misspellings. We're really sensitive because we don't want to impact emotions inside of people's organizations. And we train people on who clicks stuff. So if you click something, you might go to like a website that says, hey, you probably shouldn't have clicked that. Here's a nice video on things that you should look for as an indicator, right? That's kind of our education awareness today. And what's interesting about this concept here is, this is pretty much universal across the board, regardless of what country you're in or wherever. I mean, this is kind of what our de facto, education awareness is. And if we go with things like, companies that provide services of phishing and, education awareness, this is pretty much what you get. And what's interesting, when we do social engineers or spear phishes for an organization, especially the first time, I warn them, I'm like, listen, our phish is gonna piss people off. People are gonna be really hurt and upset, and they're gonna be yelling and screaming, but you need to understand that this is for the right purpose. And after you do this one and you go through all this shit, after that it's gonna get a lot easier for you to do it over and over and over again. So let your key people know, like VPs and stuff like that, because those are the ones that usually throw a big hissy fit, especially for like impersonating HR and stuff like that. But really, it's for the better. Now, this is today, right? Real world, if I'm gonna go after a company, I'm only gonna target a few people, like 2 or 3 max. So if I'm gonna do a phish, I'm only gonna send it to like 2 or 3 people that I know have a high confidence level that they will click on something. Like I'll target folks that aren't necessarily technical savvy. I won't go after IT people, right? I'll go after folks in sales or human resources. One of my favorite ones that I did a while ago, so I went on this company's website and I started looking at their press releases. And I noticed they had a point of contact person that was their coordinator for all of their communications for media and things like that. And they just released a big post that basically said, hey, we're celebrating 100 years as being an American-based company, billions of dollars of revenue, we've grown so much, we're so excited about this. So I took all that information that was from the press release, I'm like, I'm just gonna build a phish off of this, right? And so the first thing I did is I registered a domain name that was like from like, newsmedia.com or something like that, and I sent her an email and I'm like, hey, I just wanna let you know, we want to do a story on this, and I think, I think you guys are really awesome. It's a good testament to having a U.S.-based company, all this other stuff. And so I sent her an email, and she immediately responds back to me. Now, what does that one email tell me? Don't think technical, by the way, not technical at all. What does one email from a person inside of a company tell me? Well, who's addressed to that person? Now I have that person's info, but most importantly, the template of their email, right? So now I know that their name, their title, the colors that they use, the phone number schemes, everything, right? Just that right there alone is everything that I need to start building something. So then from there, I built a phish that basically sent the press release that was in their format, exact format, and it was a PDF attached. Did that PDF have an exploit on it? No need to. By doing that, you can do whatever you want to. So you basically have the right to do anything at that point because it looks legitimate. So I sent an email to 3 people, and that was it, 3. And it was a stupid phish. It was like, they didn't want to do like some crazy sophisticated one because they were worried about making people mad. So it was a celebration of the 100 years of being in this organization and 100 years of a testament to our employees and everything else. So the first 100 people get a free iPhone. The latest and greatest at the time was the 4S, right? And so when they got this email, I only sent it to 3 people. I had like 300 people respond to it because people were forwarding it to each other inside the bank or inside the company to get it to come back to them. I'm like, this is sweet. So I had like shells raining and coming back to me and everything. And I actually had people who were like, and after a while they decided to block it and everything. And we moved our shells off to other systems so we still had access to their infrastructure. And the best part was like this lady emails us at the email address that we sent the email out to. And she's like, hey, our IT people blocked it. It says it's a security threat. How can I get around this? And I'm like, just go to this news site we created. She's like, oh, you guys are so helpful. Thank you so much. We got her too. And one of the worst ones about this was I got an email from a lady that was like, I just love this company. She's like, my daughter is so sick right now, and we can't afford to get her an iPhone, and this is going to make her life, because she's, got cancer and all this other stuff. I'm like, oh my God, I'm like the worst person ever in this world. So I went and bought her an iPhone anyway, like the only person I bought an iPhone for. But you just gotta test those things out, and it's just simple stuff that you can do as long as it's believable. But again, only targeting a couple of people, right? Only in customizing it for that organization. When you look at a company, they bleed information. Like you could just go to LinkedIn, and it tells you everything about their company, like, hey, we just implemented ArcSight, or hey, we just implemented this, this specific piece of technology, or we have this type of antivirus, or we do this, or we do this. I mean, they give you everything about the organization because we all love bragging about ourselves. Like LinkedIn's my favorite. I can map out your entire perimeter, like how mature your monitoring and detection program is, or who you use for your MSSP. All of that stuff is things that I need to know before I actually attack you, and we profile out when you do it. And that's what you need to focus on in real phishing. We'll show some examples of it. So we look at today's training that we go through. So typically we have like online CBT type training. It's boring as hell. Like I was a chief security officer for a Fortune 1000 company in the United States. And I clicked through the CBT stuff. I'm like, next, finish. And I was in charge of security. There's no way I'm going through that stuff. It's terrible. Maybe a one-day training session if you're lucky. Like if you have like an in-person session that you do training around. Maybe you use a third party to phish you, whatever. But that's kind of what we do for training for our users, when it comes to online training type stuff. Real-world training, if you look at education awareness, you actually have to test your users. You actually have to go out and say, listen, we're going to attempt to go after you. Now, you're not going to tell them that until after. And you go after them, and you train them all year long. You have to make it fun, too. Like I like to do a lot of things with training when I was at Diebold, where we'd actually like have cool people come and speak. We'd have like giveaways, raffles, and we'd relate it to people. And one of my favorite ones was, like how to protect yourself on Facebook, and how to protect your home wireless, and how to protect your kids. When people can relate to that at their home, they start to do it on the corporate side. And let's not kid ourselves. Nobody inside of an organization, if you're not in security, cares about their company's data. They just don't care. Like there was one phish that we did, and we targeted a sales guy. And the sales guy was like, I'm like, hey man, can you go and download this file? He's like, yeah, sure. He's like, I'm getting a virus warning. I'm like, oh, just right click on virus and hit stop and exit. He's like, okay, cool. He stops and exits. And he runs in, and I get access. And I'm like, hey, can you do me a couple things? Can you just type in CMD, type ipconfig, and da-da-da-da? And he's doing this all for me, right? Because he wants the sale. They don't care about what you're actually doing. And so you have to make them realize that. My favorite today is like equipment drops. We're still doing USB drops. Like, really? That's like the most ridiculous thing. That's like 1984 shit. Like, I mean, I don't know if USBs were out then, but something like that, right? Around that time. But, I mean, auto run's already disabled anyway, all right, in most cases, in most organizations. I mean, does this even still work? I don't understand the USB drops. Personally, what I love doing is when you actually go after a company, use the mail system. Because in the mail system, you can be anybody you want to. You can be an executive in that company, you can be whomever, and you write a nice little letterhead with their company name on it or whoever you're impersonating and have them do, like step by step, tell them what to do. They will do whatever you want to because you can be anybody you want to in a handwritten letter or a letterhead or whatever that you send to them in the mail. So send them something in the mail, and all of a sudden they get it, and you just sit there and have the shells waiting, and they'll do everything for you. Like, hey, you need to go and update this, and you got to go download this file, double-click it and run, hit accept. Okay, good, done. You can do whatever you want in the mail. Like there was one time where we modified a keyboard with the Tinsy in it, okay? And so if you don't know Tinsy, it's Arduino-based, it's tiny. And we opened up the back of this keyboard, and we soldered the Tinsy device onto it, and we did an inline sniffer too, so we can capture keystrokes and all that, which has been done. But what was awesome is when we sent a letterhead from the company saying, as part of our refresh program, this is now your new keyboard, plug it in and use it and everything else. And so what we did is we waited for the control-delete sequence, and then we captured the username and password, okay? And then it would wait like until there was no key sequences typed on the keyboard for about 8 hours. And what does that mean? They've gone home or something, right? They're in meetings or gone home. And when we detected that, it would jiggle the mouse, because the keyboard you can emulate any HID. And so it would wiggle the mouse so the screen would come on, and it would type control-delete, it would log in with the username and password, and then it would drop a payload onto the system and compromise the machine. It's like you can do whatever you want to. People will do anything you want to in the mail. It's awesome. Why even drop a USB HID device anywhere? If someone's still picking up USB devices and plugging them in and double-clicking on EXEs, you got problems. Like 1990s problems. SE in-persons, these are my favorite, right? So SE's in-person, impersonating delivering people, impersonating employees, piggybacking. I mean, we start to get so sophisticated like we're James Bond. Like, busting into buildings, evading security systems, when all you need to do is just walk through the front door and act like you own the place and do whatever you want to, right? So this is some of the key concepts we do today. Real world, make it easy, simple, don't do anything crazy. You really need to use things like Proxmarks or busting the buildings. Just as an example, I was doing a physical for a store location for a big retailer chain in the United States. And literally, so some of my bogeys or trophies they get for the organization was to steal one of their point of sale systems. So they have the point of sale reader and then the point of sale system and everything. And so they're like, well, how are you going to do it? I'm like, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And so when I first started, I started really sophisticated. Like I spoofed my phone number coming from this corporate headquarters, and I called in. I said, hey, I have 2 technicians coming in. Make sure you grab their card and everything. We made shirts that look like we're from the corporate headquarters and everything. Really sophisticated, right? Didn't need to do any of that. So we had 17 store locations we had to test. So this one worked just fine. Literally the second store, I walked into the store, like just dressed like this, walk into the store. I walked up to the register and I took the whole thing and I walked out of the building. That was it. No one said anything, no one stopped me. And it had the cash in it and everything. There was like $2,000 in cash in it. I wasn't supposed to take that, but I thought it'd be cool, right? So I'm like, hey, have a good day. This thing was heavy too. I mean, it was probably like 80 pounds. So I'm like, walk out of the store, it's cool, no problem. Don't have to do anything crazy sophisticated. So here's what we teach our users, right? On the phone, don't provide sensitive information, caller ID checks, suspicious activity, et cetera, et cetera. What's great is you can be anybody. I mean, phone spoofing is obviously very easy. My 6-year-old can do it. You can be anybody in the company. One thing you have to be aware of, though, is if you're impersonating somebody inside the company, don't call their best friend. One day we were doing a fish, and we spoofed our phone number and said, hey, we have 2 contractors coming in. One of the bogeys was the data center. And so I'm like, hey, can you let these 2 guys into the data center, blah, blah, blah. He's like, who'd you say you were? I'm like, oh, this is Paul. He's like, no, Paul and I are best friends, and he's like down the hall from me. I'm like, click, so you got to be careful who you impersonate, but if you do your pretext right, especially, it can be anybody you want to on the phone. It's great, easy stuff, not sophisticated. Now, email is my favorite, right? Users are taught the hover, which is my favorite one out of them all, because the hover is like everything that is sacred in an organization. When I say hover, when you hover over a link, it's got to be legit, right? If you see that I hover over this link and it's going to gmail.com or whatever, right? It's legit, right? You're good. That's what we're taught, right? Can you defeat that? Well, you're saying yes now, but you didn't know before I was talking. But, check the domain name, look for suspicious activity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to talk about SET version 6.02, and then we're going to play a little game, okay? And this game is going to be something where I'm going to show you 2 scenarios of attack, and then you're going to tell me how to defend against it. And so with the new version of SET 6.02, listen, there's a lot of cool stuff in SET, and I can't cover it all, but there's some really cool stuff that was just added in 6.02 that I'm really proud of. But really, SET's designed, if you haven't used it, to perform any type of phishing. The new attack vectors in there really provide a high level of success, and it's really to test the effectiveness of your program, which is exactly what we're talking about here. And so that's the code I wrote during Mubik's talk and pushed out that does the new user agent string. And warning, one thing I'm cautious of is, listen, SET's just a tool. How you actually look at an organization, how you actually profile an organization, what you actually build is what's going to make it successful. Just using the stuff out of SET, I don't recommend. Build your stuff and do it the right way, because without it, it's just a tool. And if you're just using a tool, you're a tool, right? So you got to do proper OSINT, recon, homework, research your target, know your target, develop your attacks, and based on what you're going after. I mean, that's what I do. That's what you have to do. You have to build a fantasy. My whole goal with social engineering is to make you believe something that's completely bullshit, right? It has no relevance whatsoever. It's completely fake, but they have to believe it. So if you make something a little bit right, you're good. So let's do a demo. All right, can everybody see this okay? Screen? Good? So this attack was originally committed by a guy named Mgint and Whitesheep, who did this attack, and it's called a webjacking attack. Now, the new version of SET 6.0, when it was released, takes it to kind of like a whole new level. It's friggin' amazing, right? And I still have to give credit to Mgint and Whitesheep for putting this in there. It's really slick. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the social engineer attack menu, which is number 1. And we're going to go to the website attack vectors, which is number 2, okay? Now, number 2, we're going to select the webjacking method, which is number 5. And then we're going to clone a site. And what set will do is it will clone any website you want to, okay? So whether it's trustedsec.com or Gmail or whatever company you're targeting, you can clone any site you want to. Also, you can import your own. So if you make your own fake website or whatever, you can import that as well. We'll just do a site cloner. And then we're going to do, I got to type my IP address in. Now, what I recommend in this attack, and what you're going to see is just a really simple example. When I build this out, I make it look legitimate in every way, right? And I'll register a domain name that's very similar to it, and I'll explain that in a second. We're going to defeat that, but we still want to make the user interaction process as less suspicious as possible. So normally I'll register the domain name for demonstration purposes. I'm not going to. And then we'll just clone Gmail. Now, the reason I do Gmail is just because it's a form. It has forms on it. So you can do whatever has a username and password prompt. A lot of times, great ones are like VPNs or Exchange or anything that's outward facing. I like benefits web pages for customers. And what's great too is like when you send this fish out, you can be like telling them specific instructions, like make sure you hover over this link to make sure it's legit. Make sure you do this and make sure you do this. And by the way, make sure you use your username and password that you log into your Windows machine with. Great. You give them the instructions and everything they need to do. Make it easy for them because they're not going to know. So this is just a simple login field here. And it's going to clone the website. And then it moves everything to Apache, so under var www. Now, what I would do at this point, once I cloned it, is that the website you're going to see here in just a second is really simple, right? So let's go to this really quick. All right? That's not right. Oh. Who's messing with me? No, I'm just kidding. Let me clear my cache real quick. That's just cache stuff. Oh, actually, I know what that is. Okay, that should be good. All right. There. So now notice this is a very basic site, okay? What I would do is this is a very simple HTML file. Make it look believable in every way, shape, or form, okay? Make it look like a legitimate site, make it look good. And in here say, make sure that you're going to a trusted sec location, or making sure you're going to this location when you hover over this link. Because we want to make sure that you don't get phished, right? This could be a phishing scheme, or phishers like to use this technique, so make sure you hover over the link and make sure you validate what URL you're going to, all right? Now again, this would look nice and pretty for whatever you're doing. Again, benefits for me is a great one, like going after benefits websites, things like that in the United States. Those are common ones that I use, or any type of externally facing portal. Now look what happens when I hover over this. What does it say down there in the bottom left? Can you see it? It's a little bit big, but can you see that? Everybody see that? It's https://accounts.google.com. Is that legit? Would everybody before I start talking think that's legit? Yeah? So again, accounts.google.com, right? So it's legit, right? So if we click on this, we should go to accounts.google.com, right? So when I click on this link, I want you to watch what happens really quick on the URL bar. There's going to be another tab opened, and you're actually going to be at accounts.google.com, all right? Your machine is actually going to contact the accounts.google.com server, then I'm going to do a quick switcheroo, all right, without any user interaction. You ready? So I click it. No magic. I'm at accounts.google.com, quick switcheroo. Type in my username. Enter a username and password in. I'm redirected back to the legitimate site. Then over here, we got the username and password. Can't even tell, can you? It's pretty messed up. That one's a little dirty. I feel bad about that, actually. So that's defeating the hover. The next one we're going to see is the Java applet attack, and that's kind of like the flagship attack vector in SET. Now, the reason I like showing the Java applet attack is because it doesn't take advantage of any type of exploit. It doesn't use any specific exploit in Java or anything else to take advantage of it. The great thing about applets, once they run, is they run unrestricted. There's no sandbox you have to break out of. There's nothing you actually have to exploit. You're literally running it with full access on the computer. Now, the new version of SET actually has predictive analysis to see what the best method of exploitation is. So if you're running Windows 7 or Windows Vista and above, it does probability ratios to say, listen, the best route of attack based on what you have installed is this method, and I'm going to use that as my method for exploitation. So it's going to start off with things like PowerShell or Excel backdoors or using WScript or whatever. There's multiple exploitation methods that it tries. If it sees that it's Windows XP, it's going to try Windows XP exploitation methods. First, it's going to identify PowerShells on the machine, then do PowerShell injection. And my favorite attack in all of this is that a guy named Matthew Graber, who's a phenomenal PowerShell guy, came out with an ability to inject alphanumeric shellcode straight into memory. So you have the ability through PowerShell natively to inject into memory completely transparent without touching disk, which is really important, especially if you're going after things like application whitelisting or intimate memory analysis stuff. It's great for it. And what's great about this is I did a talk at DEF CON like 17 or something like that when PowerShell beta came out. And it was one of the first talks on PowerShell. And we figured out how to get around what are called execution restriction policies. So I think there's 4 different execution restriction policies. You have like all signed, remote and unrestricted or something like that, or restricted, unrestricted. And even with the most restrictive execution restriction policy, you can still execute PowerShell on the machine and bypass execution restriction policies. So what happens in the Java app when you hit run is it actually compromises it purely in memory. So there's no touching of the disk, there's no malware droppers or anything like that. And then it also does encryption. So it actually puts an AES-256 bubble in memory around your shellcode. So when it pipes out, it's coming back in an encrypted format, which is really nice. So we'll go to number 1. We're going to go to the website attack vector number 2. And we're going to go to the Java applet attack number 1. And then we're going to site clone number 2. And it's asking for using NAT or port forwarding. I'm going to hit no. Type in my IP address real quick. And I'm going to use my own Java applet, which is number 2. Now, with Java 7 update 42, I believe, they removed the ability to use self-signed Java applets. And the reason for that is because they were inherently insecure, and it's been a whole progression. It's taken them like 7 years to do this. But what's great is that you can literally do register, at least in the United States, you can register what's called a DBA, or doing business as, which is like $30. And then you just go buy a code signing cert. So I have like DBAs of like verified publisher. This is a legitimate applet. This is secure, please trust it. You can do doing business as whatever you want to. And then you just buy a code signing cert and it's legit. This is what everybody in the wild is doing. So just spend a couple bucks, go get a code signing cert, and then boom, you have a really believable fish that will work on any platform. What's great about this technique too is, again, it doesn't run an exploit, but it gets around pretty much every preventive measure that I know of. It gets around next generation firewalls, it gets around application whitelisting, it gets around antivirus, it gets around everything else you can possibly imagine. I don't know if there's any other technology, DLP, what are the buzzwords, APT prevention, I can't remember all of them, but it gets around all of them, which is awesome. So you have a high probability of success. So we're going to use the applet number 2, and we're going to clone just trustedsec.com as an example. So it's going to clone it, and then here we have payload options. Now, the payload options are kind of interesting. These will only trigger and fire if the other exploitation methods failed, like PowerShell injection, Excel injection, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll fall back to this as a very last mechanism if there's a binary. And these are all AV safe and all that good stuff, so you don't have to worry about them getting picked up. And my favorite to use is what we call multi-PI injector, which is number 16. And with multi-PI injector, what you can do is when you're going to compromise an organization, you don't know, unless you've already done your recon, what ports they allow outbound, right? So egress filtering. So with multi-PI injection, you can have it spray multiple ports, and you only want to do a few, you don't want to be too loud, but you can have it try 21, 22, 53, 25, 80, 443, and see which ones go out. And you can also use Metasploit's HTTP and HTTPS payloads so that they're proxy aware, which is great. So you can use multi-PI injector to spray out multiple ports and when you get a route home. And additionally, when you use multi-PI injector, it automatically configures the PowerShell injection the same way. So when you exploit an individual machine, it's going to use the same type of shellcode to spray out multiple ports via PowerShell, and if that works, then it's not going to execute the binaries. Additionally, with these actual binaries that get dropped are nothing. So if you double-click them, it does nothing. You inspect it, like i.e. via FireEye or something like that, it doesn't do anything. It does nothing. It's just a binary that does nothing. It just runs in and exits. However, if you provide a AES-256 encrypted block with a dynamic cipher key, which gets generated every single time in set, it'll then decrypt all of that shellcode and run the shellcode for you. So you get around things like FireEye and stuff like that as well with it, which is beautiful. So I'll do number 15. And then I'll just use an interpreter payload, just as an example. And I dynamically patch the shellcode real time, so it's not actually generating Metasploit shellcode every time. So I have all the shellcode, and I just dynamically patch it with your IP address and port automatically for you, so it's faster. And then it's going to launch Metasploit. Then over here, we're going to go to our website. You notice it looks just like TrustedSec in every way, shape, or form, right? Looks good. And the name field, you can make it whatever you want to. Obviously, I like goats, so I made mine goats. But you can name the name field whatever you want to. So you can have it be the company name, et cetera, et cetera. The publisher is what you don't have control over. So that's where you would register a doing business as and then buy a code signing cert for whatever you're targeting. So to get a doing business as and a code signing cert takes about 2 days, all right? Because you have to register the doing business as, that takes a day. And then to get a verification call that you're doing business as from the phone number that's registered to takes about a day as well. So you can have a code signing cert in 2 days. And then that publisher could be anything you want. So like I said, I own like verified publisher, trusted publisher, this applet is secure, whatever you want. You can doing business as whatever the hell you want to. It doesn't make a difference. It's great. Then you hit run. And then what happens is it redirects you back to the legitimate site so that the victim doesn't know that they were at a malicious site in the first place. So now you're back at the legitimate site. And you go back over here. You notice we have 2 shells. Now the reason I did 2 shells is there's a fallback option in set that'll say, listen, still run the payloads and make sure you have reliable exploitation in case something goes wrong. So a lot of times I like to pipe out 2 shells instead of 1, just to make sure, because sometimes you get weird issues with communication and transport. And you see here we have our interpreter shells, so we have access to the computer through that. And we didn't run an exploit, no exploit. So boom, there we go, right? Good stuff, easy. And you know, and see how fast that was to set up? It just takes a couple minutes, right? As long as you did the recon ahead of time to find out what you're actually targeting and made a good enough pretext, like tell them about the applet. Say, listen, in order to verify that you're a company-owned asset or computer, you need to run the applet that says, you know, company name security check. Cool, they'll hit run. Build that stuff into your pretext. They will do anything you want them to. Where'd my mouse go? Here we go. Okay, so we're gonna play a game, okay? It requires audience interaction. I'm gonna give you a list of multiple choice, and we're gonna talk about how to fix these issues, because there are ways of stopping these type of attacks. So I'm gonna give you multiple choice, so A, B, C, and D. You tell me which one that's gonna be the best solution. You can pick multiple ones too, okay? So for the Java applet attack specifically, that was the one you just saw now, what's the easiest way of getting rid of it? All of the above, very good, sir, very good. Yes, sir, that is correct. No, for real though. Sorry, we had a good time last night. I still crack up every time I see that picture, I'm sorry. So A, B, C, or D? A, B, C, or D? All of the above, very good, yes. So all of the above on this, all right? So A, disallow execution from temp. That'll stop most malware, right? Most malware executes from temp. It also stops Java updates, by the way, because Java requires a temp directory to run. Again, most horrible thing ever. B, disallow execution from all user profiles. Again, common places for execution for malware. Now in set, that will stop the binary dropper piece because it uses the temp directory. Now if I see all of you fuckers using it, I'm going to change the directory, so it'll be something different next time. But right now, no one's ever stopping temp, so it's great anyway. So right now, if you block temp, you'll stop the binary dropping portion. Now, C, disallow regular users from execution of PowerShell. In Windows, in group policy, you actually have application whitelisting built into group policy. It's called AppLocker. It's free. And AppLocker, what you can do is you can say, I do not want regular users from run PowerShell, and you can disallow it. And you can do that all within group policy right now, which means that the PowerShell injection technique that you just saw doesn't work. Really simple thing, doesn't break anything. Do any of your users ever need to run PowerShell, normal users? No. So a really quick way of doing it. Remove Java or secure it if possible. One thing is you can actually strip applet tags. I think I talked about that. Yeah. So most proxies support what are called whitelisted sites, right? So you can disallow applets from running from actual HTML pages unless you whitelist them. So things like Cisco WebEx or things that you need to whitelist, just whitelist those and disallow applets from everything else. You can actually do rewrite rules too. So rewrite the applet tags and just replace it with something else, and the applet will never execute. But with that, nothing's bulletproof. I showed ways of bypassing execution restriction policies, circumvent AppLocker, and also run PowerShell code when AppLocker is being restricted. But again, it's like more of like a defense in depth strategy, right? Multiple layers of security, to try to protect against it. And to be honest with you, out of the box, it'll stop set, which is great. This is a quick proof of concept. I think it's kind of hard to see, but this is a proof of concept that I got around AppLocker with. This is one of my favorite ones. It's called the Magic Unicorn Attack. It's a free tool. It's open source on GitHub. And what's nice about this is it'll actually generate the PowerShell execution stuff for you. So just a quick example, just to show you. So this is pretty sexy. So if I run unicorn.py, this is off. Oh, hang on, I gotta get to unicorn. Dang it. There we go. I'm having some major typing problems today. Man, okay, that's never happened before. If you run unicorn, you specify what payload you want to. It'll automatically generate the shellcode for you, and then it'll pipe you a shell back on this port and this IP and this port. And what's great about this is literally it gives you the copy and paste string. So let's just say you have a shell somewhere. Like for a lot of times I like using psexec commands, and I'll put this into here, and I'll paste psexec commands and Metasploit into it, and it runs PowerShell on all the systems for you and gets you shells without touching disk. And so literally, if I just run this command right here, and my IP, and do 443, it'll automatically generate the shellcode for me. It'll export that, and it creates an RC file for Metasploit for you. So if I just run the Metasploit, MSF console-r unicorn.rc, that'll load, and at the same time, let me copy and paste my shellcode here. So here we have our shellcode. It's encoded to get around the execution restriction policies. And you see here, that's just the command right there. It's just a command that you paste into a command prompt or whatever you have access to if you have remote code execution. And you just highlight this, and literally you just paste it in. So if I paste it into here, this is an example. Obviously, in an exploitation scenario, you might not have a shell. You just paste that in the command prompt, you hit enter. That's not supposed to happen. Oh, something happened here. Hang on. Just highlight that all. There we go. There it goes. I didn't copy and paste the whole thing. So if I go over to here, we get our shell. And again, not touching disk, anything else, purely memory resident. You're running under the process PowerShell, and you have access to the computer. Works great. Another fun trick that I like using, by the way, is what I call monitor. And if you look at a lot of the next generation firewalls, what they do is, like, next gen firewalls are literally like antivirus for the network. That's it. They basically write signatures that they dub behavioral analysis and stuff like that. But if you make any changes and modifications to anything next generation, you're going to get around it, okay? And so what this is I went overkill. And I never have to use this because we're so shitty anyway in security that you don't ever have to worry about doing all this crazy stuff. But in the event that we someday get good, I'll release this. And what it does is it takes Meterpreter, shoots it into memory, encases it over an AES-256 bubble, tunnels it over SSH over HTTPS. And it's polymorphic, so every single GET POST response you're going to see is going to be completely dynamic every single time. So you're going to see it basically tunnel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it. So it's just waiting for first the initial HTTPS connection. It's then going to check to see if there's a specific unique code that gets generated. And then from there, it's going to then decrypt the SSH tunnel over localhost and create a tap interface for us that we now have an interpreter shell, and it's all local on the system itself. So we're waiting here for the encrypted shell. And I run this. So it's going to do memory injection. It's going to inject into memory for you. It's going to encapsulate SSH over HTTP. Oh, I think I put that wrong IP address in. I don't have SSH running for the tap interface. 1 second. We rerun it again. And over here, when it triggers, we should see it actually trigger down here in a second. See, encrypted tunnel identified, sending challenge to verify response. Verified launching Metasploit. Right now, it created a tap interface over that SSH tunnel over HTTPS. And then we should have our shell. And you're going to notice that the shell is actually going to be at 127.0.0.1 because we're tunneling it over localhost. There's our shell, 127.0.0.1, and we're in. Hot stuff. And it's proxy aware too, which is great. So expanding on that unicorn attack with the PowerShell injection, I recently just added in version 6.0.1. One of the most common techniques that we always get into are SQL servers. And for SQL servers, the most common technique is to, I did a talk at DEF CON, like DEF CON 14 or something, on basically taking an executable, converting it to hexadecimal, and then basically pushing it through Microsoft SQL and then reconverting it back to a binary. Instead, what I use the magic unicorn attack now within Microsoft SQL. We can actually do direct PowerShell injection through Microsoft SQL and get a shell. So that's in the new version 6.0.1. So if you find a SQL server, you can use PowerShell injection for it to gain a shell through Microsoft SQL. So webjacking is a hard one. A through D, what do you think? What are the easiest ways to stop it? A, B, and C. So A, B, and C, education awareness, some technological controls, and sites that are uncategorized. And I'll talk about that in a second. Here's some things to ponder when you're doing this. Education awareness is key. I mean, teaching people, certain things to look for. This one's really tough because it looks believable. Two-factor authentication is good. Now, my favorite one on two-factor authentication is when you use something like Phone Factor. Phone Factor is my favorite to own. Like, if you have Phone Factor, I will own you every single time, period. There's no question about it. And the reason for that is because you've literally implemented two-factor authentication in the most horrendous way that you can possibly ever imagine, because you put the error back onto the human. And so let me ask you a question. Has anybody used Phone Factor before? Ever tried it out or anything? There's a lot of them like this. What it'll do is when you log in with your username and password that I just fished or whatever, it has a prompt there and it says, I'm sending a verification text or calling you or whatever to verify who you are. What is that user going to do every single time? Oh yeah, I'm probably logging in somewhere right now, yes. I've been on 8 individual pen tests with Phone Factor. I have not once had an unsuccessful attempt. Everybody has always said yes, that's me logging in. It's horrible. So you just put it back onto the user. So you got to make sure it's right, a really good two-factor authentication. And then the uncategorized sites. Uncategorized sites are a feature that's like in things like ScanSafe, Blue Coats. All of them have uncategorized site options. And those are where 90% of your phishes come from. People don't spend the time to actually register their names in like Blue Coat or ScanSafe as a categorization site. So if you block those, you actually stop about 90% of the phishes. Now, a funny story about this one that Eric taught me was if you can actually clone one of the major web content filtering's own websites, so like you can clone their own website and then submit it for approval, and it actually puts you up as a content filtering software company. It's ridiculous. Least restrictive access. Emmet's a good one. I think Rob talked a lot about that yesterday. Artillery is one of the tools that I wrote that's more on the defensive side of getting you more information. Just a quick Emmet breakdown. If you're not using it, really recommend it. Emmet can easily be bypassed. It's very, very, very easy to bypass Emmet. Like literally the 5 controls you have in place requires me to do a call instead of a return. That's it. So if I'm using ROP, I'm going to do a call from a legitimate function or an API instead of doing a return on the stack. This is an example though. What was interesting about this 0 day, it was an IE 0 day, is it actually looked for the emmet.dll file, and if it found it, it actually killed itself. It wouldn't run. So it's kind of neat. So there are some good stuff with Emmet. I do recommend it, but again, it's really trivial for us to be able to write something around it. Very trivial. So talking about fixing stuff, we have to stop the 1990s attacks. And we have to focus on continuing education that really works and it's entertaining. People are starting to believe in security now. It's weird, like when the Heartbleed stuff happened, right? Or you see it on the news and other stuff. We're getting more buy-off than we ever have in the history of InfoSec. It's phenomenal. We have to capitalize on that and make sure people understand the ramifications and some of the ways that we get in. We have to do things that relate to others, relate to people, because it personalizes it to them. For me, when I was in charge of the security program at it was a 30,000 employee shop, the most important thing for me wasn't vulnerability management. It wasn't pen testing. It was education awareness. Like if I could invest any money, period, in an organization, it wouldn't be on patch management. It wouldn't be, don't get me wrong, those are important things. It would be focusing on education awareness, because that is, to me, one of the most critical pieces. Once I had an education awareness program, to implement something like NAC or something else was trivial, because people understood why I was doing it. I wasn't the bad security guy trying to ruin their lives with making things more restrictive. It was like, oh, hey, I remember them talking about this. They're really trying to protect us. That's cool. So it has multiple benefits aside from just what we're talking about here. So if you look at building out a program, according to Bruce Schneider, I adamantly disagree with him on this one, but he doesn't believe in an education awareness program. He doesn't think it's effective. He thinks that security should be through attrition and through what you do as far as your actions. I disagree. The first thing is, creating a group to sell to your executive committee. I mean, you get buy off on the top levels. From there, you kind of build it out. And then once you actually have a program, start building it out to actually talk about security, because no one right now cares about it. When you build the program, they will come. I mean, I do a lot of fun stuff. Like we did podcasts at our company. We did quarterly newsletters that were videos. And we did like fun skits and things like that to kind of keep it entertaining. But you need to relate to information that's to employees. Like when Target happened, great example. Like, hey, there's been a big Target breach. You could be impacted. You should do this. You should do this. You should do this. You're looking out for the people. Big difference. And then last, step 3 is really just testing the program, actually going in and seeing what you're doing, how effective you are at actually stopping different types of attacks and where you need to improve on. It's like any other program that you have to test it. And then lastly, definitely maintain the program itself. Start to kind of build out everything that you need to. So I talked about this. I'll kind of skip through this part here because I'm running out of time. But next-gen products to me are just a bunch of hogwash. It doesn't stop us as attackers. And my funny thing about next-generation firewalls is, let me ask you a question. Does anybody here have enough money for security, their security program? Does anybody have enough people for the security program? Didn't see any hands, okay? So let me ask you a question. What happens when you bring a whole brand new piece of technology in and you slap it in? What happens? Do you introduce a whole new set of learning curves? You have to do a whole brand new set of complexity that you have to learn? Let me just ask another question. So you had these guys that have been ASA engineers for 10 years, right? They're phenomenal at ASAs. And all of a sudden you put a next-gen firewall in. What's going to happen there? To learn a whole new piece of technology, seriously? Let me ask you a question. Is any of us doing network segmentation in our environments? Like HR can only talk to HR and their specific things. Compartmentalization. We're not even doing the basic stuff. We don't even know where our assets are at, let alone why we need a next-gen firewall. We're well ahead, well below what we need to right now to even be thinking about this type of stuff. We need to focus on the basic things first. Some really cool stuff real quick. So I like showing cool things, and I like when I get to build stuff, I'm not a big hardware guy, so I always mess it up horribly, so I have a funny story to show. But basically, I built a new GPU cracker, and this is my 4th iteration of my GPU cracker that I built. And so I've gotten a lot better since the first rev, and so this is the 4th one. So here's the second attempt that we built, and that was actually really horrible. And it's funny because this heat sink here has a metal hook on it, and I actually sliced my finger and it dripped blood all over the motherboard. So I took that back and I had to explain hey, this just came with blood on it. I don't know what happened. But you can see here the way that the heat sinks are everything is just a bad design because it blows the air out in a pretty bad way. So we burned those cards out pretty quick. Third attempt was this one. And so these were using the NVIDIA 290Xs. So that was definitely a good one. And so our latest attempt, I wanted to go big or go home, right? And so those are 4 R9 290Xs, liquid cooled, and we're getting about 90 billion passwords per second right now. So we can crack a 9-character password in a few seconds, things like that. It works out really well. So this is one of my favorite ones to do. And what's funny about this one is when I first got this, we like to play jokes on each other and stuff like that. And I decided to make what's called a pee contest. So we couldn't pee until the whole thing was loaded with Ubuntu, okay? And so we sat there. It took us 12 hours. 12 hours to get Ubuntu on this thing. So load up Ubuntu, black screen. Go in advanced mode, black screen. But won't load anything, nothing, just dead, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll just go to a different version. Do a different version, same thing, black screen. Spent 12 hours trying to figure this out. And by the way, we had to pee really bad. We were like, listen, man, if we don't get this in the next hour, we're literally gonna die. So it's probably a good idea that we just knock off that. We didn't. For some reason, I decided to put a DVD drive on this. There's no reason for me to put a DVD drive. I never use a DVD drive, but I thought it'd be cool to have a DVD drive on here. As soon as I unplugged it, it worked fine. 12 hours. Some of the specs, we had 32 gig Corsair Dominator. You don't really need a lot of RAM for this type of stuff. Seagate 2 terabytes, Barracudas, Asus Rampage. The Asus Rampage is nice because it has 4 double wides, so you can fit the GPUs in there. And with the R9 liquid cooled, I needed the space. It's only a 1500 watt EVGA Supernova, which is nice. And so we're getting 90.3 billion passwords per second. That's NTLM. Cracks 9-character passwords in less than 20 minutes, 8 characters in 2 seconds. It's pretty sweet. I've actually shorted out. So we have a 20 amp circuit, and apparently that blows a 20 amp circuit. So be careful when you build these things because it blows a 20 amp circuit. Anybody have any questions? Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something new.